Hello and welcome to our last session for today. We will end this wonderful event with a real highlight. It was in 1988 when Ted Williams first took us along to Austin Art and introduced us to Simon and Mary and to Sissy and to a whole universe of adventure. Now Simon and Mary are grown up and the next generation is taking over. The second book of The Last King of Austin Art is called Empire of Grass and it's already out. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Ted Williams.
And hello and thank you, Anna. Lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here, Ted. Good morning, I'd rather say than hello.
Good morning.
So Ted, as I said, when we quickly talked before, last time we met, I prepared a lot of questions and we got taken away already on the first one. So I didn't prepare a lot and we already have a lot of people in the chat. I think we will fill these 45 minutes. But let's start a little bit with what we are here for, the Empire of Grass. I have it here in English.
That's the one.
Book. And the second part of it in German has just been released. So what do we have to expect? Where will you take us?
Well, the thing that often happens to me and one of the reasons I think I keep coming back to these very large books is because to an extent they write themselves, and that I don't mean that they actually do the work for me. Oh God, would that be lovely if they did. But rather that at a certain point, the complexity of the story begins to influence itself and the characters literally begin to interact in ways that, I don't know, I can only speak for me, but that I had not expected. And as a result, things go strange directions. And I've always liked that. And I think it's one of the reasons my books wind up long. I find it hard to turn away from a new and interesting plot line or set of characters or whatever, and then, you know, to weave them into the story. So in Empire of Grass, what we see is a deepening, as I like to do, a deepening of the connection to the size of the story. For instance, the name of the book, Empire of Grass, refers to the nomadic groups who live in the center of Oostenrijk on the grasslands. And they have always been a very difficult, but usually not too dangerous people because they're very disrupted and conflicted and tribal. And one of the stories that's going on in this book is how a single character is able to sort of start to make that part of the world into a more cohesive, more, I don't know, I don't want to say political because it's really all about like whacking things with swords and shooting things with arrows, but you know, a more cohesive force that begins to have an effect, among other things, on the entire rest of our storyline. So that's one thing, is that you get to see what's called the Thrithings, which is the grasslands. You get to see those cultures up close, characters who are actually living with those people and, you know, part of their daily lives. But there's also, you know, a great deal of intrigue that develops in the other plot lines as well, because again, these are big stories. So you have to have a lot of things happening. So it's hard to break it down to just one or two, but you know, there's you find out a lot about a lot of the characters. And of course, the younger ones, as is always the case with younger people, begin to run up against the reality of life and having to learn or fail to learn how to deal with it.
And I already have a question. Which is your favorite and your less favorite character of the new Austin Art stories?
Oh God, that is so cruel. That is very cruel because, as many writers will tell you, you know, characters are almost like children. You know, we may understand that some characters are bad gals or bad guys, but we may still have a secret soft spot for them because they're fun to write. I would say in terms of that, the most interesting character to me has been Nezeru, who is essentially, in our world, we have the sort of the immortals who are not actually immortal, but very long-lived. The fairy folk, as they're thought of, and the mortals. And she is half mortal, half of the immortal race, and she is a soldier. And because she's a soldier of the sort of arch villainess of the piece, she's very, very much a part of that empire. And that way of thinking, it's a very Spartan society. You're not supposed to think for yourself. So she's a very interesting character to write because she's a sincere thinker, but she's also the product of literally thousands of years of indoctrination. So I'm very fond of her. She's really interesting. And then both of the twins from the original prophecy are revealed in the end of the last book and this book. And so these twins, people who read the original books, the Drachenbein Thron and that series, will know who the twins are. And they're both very interesting characters. And what they do is also to carry us through some of these other environments. So those two are, I'm not naming names because for people who just start the story, I don't want them to know the characters' identities. But so yeah, and that's one of the neat things about coming back to this world is that it's not just new characters, it's telling about parts of it that I haven't ever spoken of before. And in some cases, having to really figure out how everything worked. So that's been great fun. And almost all the new characters, I think all of them are interesting to me because they give me a whole new chance to look at this place, this invented world from different angles.
Indeed, really. I like them too. You just said, you like to write these epic stories, these long, big stories. Who is leading the way? Is it you or is it the characters?
Well, to be honest with you, that's one of the most difficult questions there is because it's, and I think most writers of really long books probably experience something of this, but it's really both. For me personally, I am George R.R. Martin coined a way of thinking about it, of calling people architects or pantsers. And of course, architects are what they sound like, people who like to build a very firm foundation for their story. And pantsers comes from seat of the pants, meaning people who, fly without preparation. Just let me go see what happens. I've found that some of both is necessary. And I do tend to do a lot of world building ahead of time or as I'm going so that I feel I know what the place is, what the culture is. But at the same time, if you overplan, you find yourself getting very stale. And you also find that you can't figure everything out when you're planning it. A lot of it comes in the writing. So characters, you've got an idea for a scene, which is going to solve a bunch of useful plot points. And when you get there, the character won't do it. They don't, well, some writers may literally talk to their characters, but it becomes clear to you that that's not intellectually honest, that character is no longer, a pawn you can move around because that goes against what you've built in them and what has arisen out of the story. So that's very frustrating when that happens, but it also sends you off in new directions and makes you think of things in different ways. So it's really both. I cannot plan these things out entirely when I'm beginning them, but I need to know enough. Oh, well, one last thing is that I need to know enough to be able to foreshadow as I go what some of the important things are going to be at the ending. And when you're writing a story for like 5 years, it's not possible to see everything you're going to do at the ending because, you know, the characters are going to have split and divided up and gone different directions. So you have to find ways to foreshadow things you don't even know about as a writer, you know, literally things you don't know, but you know something important is going to happen with so-and-so. So you find ways to show that without committing to something that you're going to regret later on. So it's kind of a, you know, it's a very complicated kind of performance. And one of the reasons genre writing, like fantasy, science fiction is a genre, mysteries are a genre. One of the reasons genre writing is so interesting is because you have a super well-informed readership. They are people who oftentimes have read many books in the general style that you're writing. So they have seen many, many different plots and ways of resolving things, because these are, at one level, these are adventure stories also. So there has to be threats and danger and risk of life. So the audience is always trying to outthink you because they've read a lot of things like this. And that becomes an additional factor. So, you know, in a way, it's probably like, I don't know what the word is in German, in American, in English, rather, we call, you know, the things they put in newspapers, crossword puzzles, right? You know, where you fill in the letters and they have very esoteric clues.
Kreuzworträtsel.
Kreuzwort.
Rätsel.
Rätsel?
Yeah.
Kreuzworträtsel. And so in a sense, that's what a writer of genre fiction is doing, is they are trying to provide clues without giving things away, making the reader work, but also playing with the reader's expectations, in effect, tricking readers. You know, we're constantly saying, they'll think I'm doing this, so what I should do is this, but they may expect that also. So what I'll do is I'll make them think I'm doing this, then they'll think I'm going to do this, but really I am doing that, you know, that first thing. So it's this very interesting, entertaining, complicated game that you're playing with the expectations of readers, as well as the requirement to write a good story, a real story, and write with as much realism, even in a fantasy novel, as you can bring to it.
Yes. So at least with the New Austin art story, you got to an end. I hope to a interesting end. So the Navigator's Children will be the last book. Will be released in English in October next year, I think.
Well, perhaps, Anna, since this was last week, just in the last few weeks, it's become increasingly clear to me that I'm going to have to split the last volume. This is the American version. Yeah, she's laughing at me. Everybody's laughing at me because I said, I'm going to do this in 3. I swear I'm going to do it in 3. But once again, I have stumbled into another 4-book trilogy. But so the next volume, which is just as long as the previous one, it's only half of the last one. Yeah. So The Navigator's Children was the original title for the last volume, but now my publishers want to put another title on the 3rd volume and save Navigator's Children for the 4th and final, which, by the way, we are hoping to have finished quite quickly after the first half. So it won't be, you know, another year's waiting, you know, it'll be out fairly soon. So that's what's going on at the moment. However, I mean, I know for a fact that that's all there is. It's just that the last book became a bit too long to be a single volume.
Yeah.
So anyway, did you have a question about it, or did you just want to hear me rambling on about how I've been an idiot again and thought I was going to finish in 3?
I think we talked about that last time, and you promised me the trilogy. But
I tried.
I'm not upset at all.
It's so embarrassing though, because I told everybody, I said, you just watch. I know I'm going to finish this one in 3 books, and then it just became increasingly clear that it wouldn't happen. And it felt, I feel like an idiot.
No, you don't have to. But in between, there will also come Brothers of the Wind, which is a Little Austin art story, which is...
Yes. Yeah, it's still a decent length of story, because for me, you know, I just cannot write short for some reason. I try, God knows. Brothers of the Wind. And what happened, without going into detail about it, is that when I started the Last King of Ostenard, this current, I almost said trilogy, but this current set of books that we're talking about, the sequel to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which were the earlier series. Anyway, when we started this, at the same time, I also agreed to do 2 short novels. The first one would be a bridge between the old series and the new series, and that one came out first, and that was the heart of what was lost. So for various complicated and somewhat boring reasons, I decided to do the 5th book as part of the larger Ostenard story and telling a very important part of Ostenard and the history. But since it was going to be coming at the end, it wasn't necessarily something you had to read before. And so it's about one of the most important characters, 2 of the most, because which are the brothers Inaluki and Hakatri. And Inaluki became the Storm King, who was the villain of the first trilogy, he said, using the term somewhat loosely. And Hakatri, his brother, who, as readers will see, has an appearance in the second part of Empire of Grass. So, although both of them are now long dead, but that's another story. So anyway, but within the sort of world that I've created, going back to the first set of books, what happened to Hakatri and his brother Inaluki back in the past is a very big effect on the world now. So this story goes back to tell about Hakatri and his brother Inaluki, one day to become the evil Storm King, having to fight a dragon that has come down from the north, and what happens to Hakatri. And all these things are things that have been mentioned many times in the other books, but I thought it was time to tell the story. And then the story, it's not just a story of a fight with a monster and what happens afterwards. It's also a story about loyalty and racial prejudice and all number of other things as well. So that's the Brothers of the Wind. And the Brothers of the Wind in the title refers to Hakatri and Inaluki, who are 2 of the high-ranking young people of the ruling household of the Scythi, the Immortals.
Yeah. So with this information now, especially about the 4-book trilogy, I hardly dare to ask, but there are a lot of questions about, or suggestions about what should come next. So any plans for what's after The Last King of Ostnard? I have suggestions. Bobby Dollar, something in the direction of Shadow March again. Anything we can already talk about?
I thank you for that. I have all kinds of things on the burners, and at the moment, coming out of the pandemic and what it's done to the publishing industry, things are complicated and frustrating at the moment in terms of trying to, they're just coming back online, which is one of the reasons that we had over a year of not getting the new book published and things like that. And in fact, actually, that's one of the reasons Brothers of the Wind is coming out now instead of after the end of the trilogy, because I had this short stretch and I said, well, I might as well work on it now while we're waiting to see when the publication date for the rest of the trilogy is going to be. So, but I have a bunch of things on the fire. I'd be interested in writing more Ostenard, and I have several ideas about that, but I'm not going to detail them right now because it would be too premature.
Yeah,
I would not mind, because a lot of people have asked. I have some other land stuff I would like to write. And then, as always, I have other ideas that I would love to work that have nothing to do with any of the other things I've written. And when I get to work on those, we'll see. So there's lots of things on tap, but I haven't signed the next set of contracts yet, again, because there's a great deal of craziness in the publishing industry. So I can't make any announcements because nobody's actually told me, here's what we want you to do next, or here's what we're willing to publish next, or that conversation can't happen, right? Or it's starting now. So there's lots of things I'd like to write. And I found writing this series that actually my earlier prejudice against going back to any of my own worlds was a little bit arrogant. It was kind of like, oh, I'm too good to do that. People will think this or people will think that. And then I started doing this one and I realized, actually, this is really fun. I do like going back as long as it's not just continuing the same story over and over again. That's why I put 30 years between the first trilogy and this one. And the things that have gone with it have been set at different times. The Brothers of the Wind is set about 800 years before the Dragonbone Chair, maybe 1,000. So, there's ways that I can attack these old worlds in new ways. So, but unfortunately, I just haven't signed the contracts for whatever's coming next. So I'd be guessing.
So Corona is mixing up the publishing industry quite a lot.
It has, yeah. And part of it is because I think, this is me guessing, but the traditional part of publishing where I am still involved, is still based in New York, which was one of the hardest hit places. And there's a great deal of physical contact. You'd think, how can that be in this day and age? Well, it won't be in another 10 years or so. But right now, there's still a lot of shipping things around from place to place and, people literally having to get in and work on hard copies of things and bike messengers and, the whole apparatus of the publishing industry in New York. So that has been badly affected by, the terrible pandemic they had there and other things. And, so we're just kind of waiting on a lot of things. It's not always fun. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's just a big vacation, because of course, we still all have to make a living, all of us writers. So it can be difficult too.
But you used that time actually to do reading sessions every weekend. You offer reading sessions for your American fans, for your European fans?
Yeah. Well, it was part of it. I didn't pretend that I had anything big to bring, when the pandemic started. And I just thought, what could I do that would at least give people something to do while they're stuck inside? And so that's why I started doing readings on Sundays. And after I started doing the evening readings, evening my time, my European friends said, what, we don't get readings? So then I started doing the 2:00 in the morning, my time reading, which is one of the reasons that my eyes are so red and tired looking right now. Cause I did it last night. But yeah, and it's been a good experience. I've enjoyed it.
I can imagine. Yeah. Here's one question about writing again. Do you write your books chronologically, or do you flesh out parts as you see fit and then perhaps start with one part and then go back to another one?
Well, it depends on if you're including the rewriting process. In the original process, in other words, doing what I would call the first draft, telling the story the first time through, no, it's pretty much in the order that you see it. In my mind's eye, because these stories have many characters in different places and slightly different timelines, I feel like it's like one of those war games. It's like pushing little bits forward, okay, we'll put these folks over here. We'll move these forward here. We'll grab these people and suddenly move them over here. And for me, it's easiest to do that like I'm weaving a tapestry, so that I'm moving along at the same on all of them, in order, in the order that the book is usually going to be. Then I do occasionally, I'll go back and say that part didn't work. I'm going to rewrite that section, or I need to add something, but that's more in rewrite. And there's not usually a lot of that. It's mostly just me pushing it forward bit by bit, trying to plan ahead as I do. So.
Okay, there's another question about Osten art, actually. Margarete, do you have multiple points of view in the volumes? Because in the first volume, it was quite focused on Simon, and then you switch over to the others. Is there a plan to it?
Well, not so much a plan as what you see with Simon back in the original Dragonbone chair is that even there, I had started to break things up into different character viewpoints. And the reason was when you have...
Stand was mit AirPods?
Moment, ich habe das gleich wieder.
Oh, are we? No, I'm on this end.
Yeah.
Hören?
It's
So-
just not me hearing you because he did something wrong. Definitely. Must be.
Okay, good.
Can't have been me.
I'm glad a scapegoat has been found. I'm glad blame has been assigned. So one of the things I discovered when I was writing the Dragonbone chair is that I moved away from the idea of having a sort of narrator, which doesn't mean, you necessarily have to have an actual narrator telling you the story, but it does mean in a lot of things, in a lot of books, that the author themselves is present and is describing things to you in a way that suggests, yes, there's really a person ordering these events or telling this story, which is fine. I mean, some of my favorite books work that way. But what I realized for me is that I thought I could better give an idea of how broad the story was and how complicated the world is by choosing a lot of different characters to tell the story. Because otherwise, if you want to have a lot of different things going on, you have to either have them coincidentally all happen to one or two people, like Marco Polo, who travels along and the adventures happen to him where he is, or you have to have a narrator sort of explaining to you what these things mean and what's happening to people, or, an author explaining. And I didn't want to do either of those things. So I decided instead to have many, many different main characters besides the most main characters, so that I could tell the story through a lot of eyes and with a lot of voices.
Okay, here we have a question you probably can't answer directly, but once this all is over, the pandemic, when will you be back in Germany?
Soon, I hope. I was actually just thinking about that the other day. I would very much like to come back as soon as it's convenient. I always have a great time in Germany, and the German speaking audience is certainly one of my very most important in a lot of ways. And I'm not talking just about sales or something. I'm talking about the way that my work gets discussed and things of that nature. So yeah, I'm itching to get back, and it's been, I think since 2018 or something like that. So yeah, I'd like to come back as soon as I can.
And you love to learn German words, right?
Yeah, I'm working on it. It's like one of so many things that I work at, and then I don't come for a couple of years, and whatever progress I've made has slid out of my grasp again.
So today you learned one Kreuzworträtsel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last time we met, you learned a very important one, which was Flaschenöffner.
Flaschenöffner.
Yeah, it was the bottle opener.
Yes, I remember now. Yes, exactly. And these are things that one should know. You can never tell when you're going to be in a situation where your life is hanging on the need for a Flaschenöffner.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, they're. By the way, they are now talking to each other, giving hints to where your reading sessions are and everything in the chat.
Good,
so,
good.
You have very nice fans.
We welcome people. All you have to do, if you want to come and listen to one of the, first of all, they're all recorded and they're all available on my social media, and you can find them on YouTube. But if you want to come for the live ones, just I post them on Facebook and Twitter. And so, all you have to do is just click on the URL while I'm reading, and you can join me live, or you can watch them after the fact. I don't claim they're hugely entertaining. I don't set myself on fire or anything, but, I'm just reading from my stuff, and, we're hanging out, and, I say hello to everybody who pops in. It's kind of like it's like a campfire, that's the feeling I'm going for.
And I think that's the difference, many authors offered something like that, reading sessions during the pandemic, but you actually always take time to talk to the people instead of just reading and then leaving them alone. You really like them.
Well, first off, yes, I do. I've always been very lucky in my readership. I have met very, very few readers of mine who I wouldn't be comfortable sitting next to on a long train trip. They just seem to be really cool people, people that I get along with well. Perhaps because of that or whatever, I've never been that comfortable with the idea of, having fans in the sense of people that are sort of standing apart from you and presumably being like, oh, we love you. And I get so much kindness out of the readers, and I know how much the things that I loved and love, my favorite books meant to me. And that's enough, so I'm happy just to kind of have people as a circle of friends and whatever, I don't feel comfortable. I've never felt comfortable with the idea of fans. I love the people themselves. It's just that concept kind of drives a wedge between somebody who's essentially making something and the people they want to share it with. That's always been a little strange to me. And maybe that's because I've never gotten famous or rich enough to need to worry about it. I don't know. But yeah, as much as possible, I like to make it just a very large circle of people I enjoy and that I hope enjoy me. And, we do stuff together.
And you get feedback. That's important as well, how people like your stories,
Oh, yeah.
what they want to read, if your ending was expected, the ending of a book or not.
We haven't done that much of that. And actually that's a very good thing, Anna. I should have a special, this is your chance to complain night where people can say, I hated when you did such and such, or wow. Oh yeah, no, that's a really good idea. I've mostly been, I spend the first few minutes sort of just catching people up on what's going on. And then I read till the end of the hour, and I should do more of that. Thank you for that idea. I will credit you when
you will get it for free. No problem at all. So now we go from you being a writer to you being a recipient. What are your favorite books and writers?
Wow. Okay. There's a lot to answer there. There's a lot to unpack. One of the interesting things that I've found has happened to me, and it's not just with books, is that I'm taking in much less fiction than I used to. So I'm not the world's best source on what's currently going in. Part of that is because fiction is not a rest for me. It makes my writer brain work. And it drives my wife, Deborah, crazy because, of course, she wants to watch this program or that program. And I'm like, I need to rest my brain, not be worrying about other people's plot lines. But anyway, and I'm not reading as much as I used to either, except for primarily source material. So when I think about my favorite writers, they're almost all people that I read when I was a kid, when I was coming into the field in my early years. And there are a lot of science fiction and fantasy writers like Ray Bradbury and obviously Tolkien and Lord Dunsany and T.H. White, The Once and Future King, which is one of my absolute favorites, and Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast books, which are huge favorites of mine. But there's also a lot of, less obviously genre writers that I love too, like, Kurt Vonnegut. Everybody in my generation, we grew up on Kurt Vonnegut and his sense of humor and his kind of fatalistic way of approaching the world were, something that affected a lot of us. I read Thomas Pynchon. I love Thomas Pynchon's circularity and things like that. At the moment, I'm reading Hilary Mantel, who wrote an amazing series of books about Thomas Cromwell, who was Henry VIII fixer. And she's a brilliant writer, and it's some of the, if maybe the best historical fiction I've ever read, because her version of him is a truly fascinating character. And for people writing about a sort of imaginary 14th or 15th century, she does such a good job of recreating Tudor England, and not in a kind of chocolate box way. I mean, she really tries to get at how characters 500 years ago would be different from people today. So, and yet still fully human, fully as clever and determined as anybody alive now. So that's a couple off the top of my head. Basically what I'm mostly reading is nonfiction these days, unfortunately. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure I could name any specific thing, because like any chapter of any book, there's like 7, 8, 9 different things I'm pulling out of the office shelves, not to mention online, research as well. Anybody who thinks that you don't have to research if you do fantasy and science fiction is living in a dream world. It's incredibly, for me anyway, there's an incredible amount of research involved.
That would be Forsten Art, for example, about maybe medieval living, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. Check? I mean, for me, it feels very important when you're building a world that when you do make changes from the real world that we know, that they feel grounded. So for instance, if you have a society that has occasional magic, you need to think about what effect that might have on a society more like the real world version of whatever it is that you're sort of imitating. And even just the small, just juggling the details of when certain technologies come along, is one of those, for want of a nail, the horse was lost. For want of the horse, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the battle was lost. You don't know what it might make happen. So, excuse me. So it's a very interesting thought experiment. And that's one of the most fun things about writing and researching. But at the same time, once you've committed to a fairly consistent world, everything has to feel like, yeah, that would really happen. You can't just have things you pull out of your back pocket and suddenly this character can magically fly or something like that, especially when it's convenient. So to make the fantasy parts, the supernatural bits, the magical bits, to make those work, I think they have to be very strongly grounded in something that feels very real, so that, and also that the characters feel real. And so the reader is saying, if I lived in that world, in that situation, yes, I would probably react that way. That feels, it's not that they're consciously thinking it, but it's something that's just soaking into them, that yes, it feels like a real place. And if you can achieve that, then the magical stuff or the supernatural horror stuff or whatever feels more real. It's the difference between the ghosts in Scooby-Doo and the ghosts in Shirley Jackson's, The Haunting of Hill House. It's all about how much you've set it up and how real it feels.
So with all this reading, writing, and researching, any time for movies? Because Captain America in the back.
Yeah, that is Captain America. Well, one of the things you mentioned writers and people like that who were important or who I loved. And although I didn't this time give the list of all the writers that affected me when I was a young person. But definitely the Marvel comics were very big for me when I was a kid, and I discovered them during their kind of early heyday, and really liked their approach to things, their kind of sense of humor and the kind of energy that they had compared to the older comics. So yeah, so needless to say, when they started doing these multi-million-dollar movies with excellent effects and all that, there's a part of me that the kid in me is like, hell yeah, absolutely, I'm going to be there. I'm going to the next Avengers movie or whatever, because it's the kind of thing that, like, when I was a kid, we didn't have we had one superhero movie. There was the first Superman movie when I was a teenager, but we didn't have those, so I'm not that grown up. I probably wouldn't be writing this kind of stuff if I was that grown up. So yeah, I'm thrilled to have lived to see good versions of these comic book things that I loved when I was a kid, and that kind of, helped to make me into a writer or creator or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, I've been to all the Marvel movies, and we'll probably continue to go for a while. And we also, our kids now are like in their early 20s. So there are now more kinds of movies we can see together. But for a long time, that was something that the kids wanted to go to, that I wanted to go to also. So it was a bonding thing. It's like, yeah, cool, let's go see the new Iron Man movie. Yeah, we want popcorn, blah, blah, blah. It was just a big family thing.
So dad had the same interests as the children. Doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, exactly. Dad is no more mature than any of the young people.
So Ted, we are nearly at an end already. I'm very sorry to say. Yes, I really enjoyed that as usual. Just to sum up, because we are here to talk about your books, we thought we were, but then, as usual.
As usual.
The second part of Empire of Grass, or the second part of the German book, has just been released. We are waiting for Brothers of the Wind. I suppose you don't have a German release date yet.
Not that I'm aware of. No, it just went out in the spring. And although it's not like one of my big volumes, it still will probably take a while for translation.
For the German fans, there is a Klett-Cotta booth at the virtual book fair. Go there and annoy the people until you know. And we just posted a link in the chat so that people can quickly access it. You managed again to write a 4-book trilogy, which we will, of course, read until the end. And we all hope to have some more 4-book trilogies.
Maybe next time I'll really manage,
We would be very disappointed.
Who am I kidding? I never manage.
And we already have an answer because one of the German ladies already talked to the publisher, to the German, and spring next year, Brothers of the Wind will be out as well.
Good. I think people will enjoy it. It definitely is an Ostenard story, and it fills in a lot of Ostenard history, but there's a lot of surprises in it as well. It just because the general history doesn't mean that you're going to know where this story is going. So.
Yeah. Okay, then we wait for that. And we will hopefully not wait for you to come to Germany for far too long.
No, I hope you won't either. I miss Germany, and I look forward to being there again soon.
Germany misses you too.
Oh, thank you. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed that. All the people in there enjoyed it. It was a great pleasure they write. So applause to you. And I talk to you soon again.
All right. It's a deal. Thanks very much.